Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me today is Lucy Beadnell of the ARC of Northern Virginia. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it's been about a year since we last spoke,
Right.
And it's time to have you back again because the ARC is doing some new and exciting things.
Sure.
And so one of the things that caught my attention, because I'm a public speaker, is your new Toastmasters program for both people within the community, the autism community or the disability community, but also their allies. And this is kind of focused on helping people to become better self-advocates. So tell us a little bit about this very exciting program and how it came about.
Sure. So for many, many years, we've had a chapter of what's called People First, which is an international self-advocacy organization. So self-advocacy is people with developmental disabilities learning to speak out and advocate for their own supports and services. And we found over time that we needed a new way to enliven and empower that group. And so Nancy Mercer, our previous executive director, had this idea of partnering up with Toastmasters, the international public speaking group that many big corporations have, lots of people just have in their community that mostly typically developing adults participate in. And she found some great local Toastmasters who were really interested in kind of joining forces with us. And so we banded together and we call it A Life Like Yours Toastmasters. One of the big mottos at the ARC is people with developmental disabilities want a life like yours. So that was the inspiration for our name. And we work with those really experienced Toastmasters to adapt the typical Toastmasters curriculum to meet the needs of the folks who show up for us.
Yeah, so you were talking about the fact that it's also unique in the fact that everybody in the room participates. So that might be staff, it might be parents, it might be, but everybody in the room speaks.
Yep, we really encourage folks with developmental disabilities to come on their own, but if someone needs support, obviously by all means bring it. Sometimes we have guests from other Toastmasters chapter in the region who may or may not have disabilities. We have our host Toastmasters, so we have a big mix of abilities and interests and background in the room, and you're right, it's a totally level playing field. The first rule of Toastmasters is everybody there speaks. So if we do something that we often do called table topics, where you ask a simple question like, what's someone's favorite thing about spring? Every single person in the room answers to the best of their ability. And so for some people that's with gestures and a communication device. For some people that's really well thought out paragraphs of speech that just come tumbling right out. But yeah, we absolutely have the rule that staff or parents or anybody there to support someone speak to. We should all feel included. And I think you really appreciate what someone with a disability is doing to learn to speak if you know you're next in the hot seat.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of the greatest fears that people have, all people have, is public speaking. I mean, they've like done extensive research on this. So what brought this to my attention was the fact that Cameron Graham of Cameron's Coffee and Chocolates fame is going to start this program, according to her mom. And so I'm thinking, this is fantastic because Cameron is the face of Cameron's Coffee and Chocolate. She has spoken in public before, but she is a person who has the desire to have better communication skills, and so she is going to learn to be a better spokesperson for her business, for herself, and for the disability community.
No, it's such a natural need for everybody to learn to speak for themselves. And in the People First component of the meeting, we talk a lot about what we do at the ARC in terms of advocacy at the local and state levels for changing supports and services for people with developmental disabilities. But every single day, we all need that ability to speak up for ourselves, to say hi to the customer at our job, to greet our parents, to greet the person we see on the street, to ask for something from our manager, whatever that looks like. And as people have participated in this program over time, we've seen folks go from mumbled or one-word answers to looking up and making eye contact and speaking several sentences at a time and really broadcasting. It's like you're opening up a shell and watching something grow out of it.
Well, so let's talk about two of your rock stars, Elizabeth Carter and Frank Stevens. And I heard both of them at the Fairfax County budget hearings. Elizabeth Carter was amazing, but Frank Stevens needs his own show. Like, I want to be him when I grow up. I have never seen anybody with the comedic genius, timing, the use of props in a government building. Let's just put it out there, in a government building. I had never heard him speak before. He's amazing.
He's a fun guy. He got his start, as he shared in the speech he did recently with the supervisors 13 years ago. He was graduating from Fairfax County Public Schools. For folks who have not had the pleasure, Frank happens to have Down syndrome. And he was someone who was looking for a little bit of supports to make him successful in employment, but who already had a ton of skills that we could harness. And so he went and spoke before the supervisors and kind of has had this rocket ship rise to fame because, as you said, he's very funny, witty, great at understanding politics and what's going on in the world and intertwining that in his speeches. You know, this speech last week to the Board of Supervisors, he started off by saying, Chairman and supervisors, we can't keep meeting like this.
Oh,
referring back to 13, I mean, and right away they were laughing. They introduced him as the famous Frank Stevens of YouTube fame and for his feud with Ann Coulter over her use of the R word in speaking about President Obama. Just really funny, smart, savvy guy who's a joy to be around, and so has become a Special Olympics ambassador and does a lot of advocacy on the Hill. Just really well known in our community because he's the essence of what we all want to be, right? Fun and savvy and smart and well spoken.
I wish I was that funny. I wish I had that kind of I wish I could like bring the house down the way Frank did. And like I said, this is in a government chamber. If you can connect with that, tough crowd. They're not there to like have a good time, but everybody was having a good time. And I think it kind of blows apart this idea too that just because someone has a developmental disability, they're Downs, or maybe they're on the autism spectrum, that somehow they're not capable of these things.
Right.
I mean, you know, to see him, watch him, and hear him is to blow apart stereotypes that we have in our head about how people are limited.
People love meeting Frank for that reason, and I think are wonderful at articulating that. I just had no idea. I had no idea that folks with developmental disabilities, Down syndrome, et cetera, could be so well spoken. And that's speaking to the life like yours, right? That's the founding of our Toastmasters.
Yes.
We have the same lives and the same needs and wants as everybody, and sometimes we need supports to get there, just like everybody else. It may look different than what you need. And Frank is so very clearly able to speak to that while being so relatable to everyone, and he just takes people off guard with how funny and smart he is. And just a joy. What a tremendous ambassador to the disability community. I wish I could clone him.
Well, you are going to clone him, because Toastmasters is going to clone all of these people, and they may not be Frank, but they're all going to come close to being a rock star in their own right. So how do programs like this develop? I mean, the ARC, first of all, has a range of things, and you're kind of always developing and adding. How do you decide what you spend your resources on?
Well, we are an organization by and for people with developmental disabilities and their families. So 100% of our ideas for what we do come from people with developmental disabilities and their families. So we found people in our People First group saying, I want to be better at, I don't want to just be learning about advocacy, I want to be doing advocacy. So then we say, well, then let's find a way to do that together. And we have families come to us and say, you know, I'm having trouble finding affordable housing for my loved one. We want them to be able to have a great quality of life and live in the Northern Virginia area where they always have. So we say, all right, we'll write a grant, we'll design a bunch of housing workshops. We'll figure it out. And I think that as long as we keep listening to people with disabilities and their families and having that steer us in our programming, we can't go wrong.
So speaking of supportive housing, I would imagine that demand has gotten bigger for a variety of different reasons. First of all, because there's a mandate that we take people and put them in community settings. That's from like the Department of Justice has said, people with disabilities need to be in the community, and I think that's very wise. There's a greater demand because a lot of young people are being mainstreamed through our public schools, and I always point to the fact that when you mainstream these young people back to a life like yours, they are raised with the expectation that their life is going to look like everybody else that they're sitting with at high school.
Yeah.
So the changes, the demands, it seems to me, probably over the last 40 years have changed dramatically from what the expectancy was 40 years ago to what a young person like Frank and Elizabeth, their expectation today.
Yeah, just in my last 10 years at the ARC, we've seen big swings from when I got there. People would say, you know, I want my child to live with me forever. How do we bring supports in to do that? To, I want my child to live in a congregate setting like a group home, to my child's 28. They need to get out of the house and live on their own like the other 28-year-olds. How do we make that happen? And you're right, inclusion in schools, I think, has been a huge driving force in that. When you see how successful people with developmental disabilities can be, when you offer supports and raise the bar, they expect inclusion their whole life, as they should. It's been really cool. And a few years ago, we started working on the housing issue, and we thought that we would be right away experiencing hurdles with, you know, housing accessibility, and it turns out that was light years ahead of our problem. People needed to know what affordable housing was. This was all new to our community. Folks had lived with their families or in congregate settings forever, and so what does that look like? How do I get there? How do I write a budget? How do I apply for services and supports? Can I bring my services with me? Do they come with the house? All these kinds of things that we spent years figuring out, and just in the last 18 months, I think we've gone from about a dozen people who had moved to close to 70 people who have moved in this area using housing vouchers and other kinds of tools to get out of their families' homes or get out of other congregate settings to have a place that's really their home. It's like magic.
So you guys work too collaboratively with other organizations. The one that leaps to mind is the GMU Life program, and how that's also helping support your long-term agenda and goals.
The George Mason University Life program is tremendous. It was founded by Dr. Heidi Graf, who works at Mason, and she found what all of us knew, right? That students with developmental disabilities are expecting the same after high school post-secondary experience as their typically developing peers. And so she set out and designed a program that parallels that. So students can live on the Mason campus, in Mason dorms, with RAs and support staff who are other Mason students. It's an integrated environment, and they can take life skills and other life learning classes that are really relevant to being a person with a developmental disability, skills that you may have trouble learning in other formats. They can audit typical classes at George Mason University. They have internships on the Hill. Very active in getting people really, truly ready and prepared for real life and work. And one of the greatest ways that they do that is having the students live on the campus. Then all the time we hear from these parents who say, you know, I knew that they'd be coming back home afterwards. They don't want to come back home.
Why would you?
No
like
college students. Once you move out of your parents' house,
like, no thank you.
Go back. You've had your own place and your own friends and your own way of doing it. And it's a lot of those families who have driven forward the idea that we need more housing and more choices because our students don't want to come back to live with us, and we think that's a great thing.
I think it's a great thing too, and I think the other positive is that mainstreaming them, whether it's high school or it's in a university setting like George Mason, it impacts the neurotypical people all around them. You know, we're raising a generation of young people who are neurotypical, who suddenly realize that life is a spectrum. It's all a spectrum. There are no binaries really in life. It's not this or that, you know, and to have them accept these special needs people as capable, as funny, as friends, as part of their social set, this is going to carry forward, you know, like long after I'm gone, the world will be a different place.
I couldn't agree more, and I can't stop but thinking about an inclusion specialist who came to our state convention a few years ago whose son had a really significant developmental disability. And they said, you know, we thought that we were including him in his preschool and kindergarten and elementary school, et cetera, for his benefit, but as it turned out, we weren't. It was great for him, and he had a tremendous time, and he learned a lot, but the teachers kept coming to us and saying, the skills you really want students to have are skills that they learned from your son. How to be patient, how to support people around you, how to work as a team with folks who are different than you, how to kind of pick up on what's going on in someone else's life and support them where they need it. Those are the skills that make people successful in their jobs and in their communities. I think most of us can speak to the fact that we don't use calculus and algebra every day, and it's a hugely important part of forming your brain, but we do use the skills with how you work with people and support people and navigate folks who are different than yourselves every single day. Our survival depends on it.
That is fantastic, and I think we are out of time, so we'll be back after this break. Please join us for the next segment of Your Need to Know.
Oh, look, a redhead. Staring contest. You still got it. I know.
Come alive with the forest.
The dad was cute.
You were looking right at us.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Lucy Beadnell from the ARC of Northern Virginia. When we last spoke with Lucy a minute ago, we were talking about the reaction of students who are in classrooms from preschool to college with students who are intellectually disabled, and how that impacts the students, the neurotypical students, as much as it does the students that are being mainstreamed who have a disability. And Lucy, I would say that that's basically teaching the larger population empathy.
It's amazing, and
I remember reading as I was younger that if you read something once, you understand 10% of it, and if you can say it back, you understand 50% or whatever, but if you can teach it, you understand 90% of it. It really solidifies with you. And so what a lot of teachers of students with developmental disabilities have said is the other students in the classroom support that student by helping reiterate the lesson to them. They are learning to teach. That makes the knowledge solidify in them to a much greater degree. They are teaching themselves and teaching others, quite literally.
Yeah, and I just have to think that the larger impact as each year goes on, and we are mainstreaming more people, more students, because there are just simply more students with disabilities, or at least it seems like there are more, that are in our public school system everywhere, not just in urban areas like Northern Virginia, but in every community school, every public school all over the country. So we're teaching this new generation what it means to live and to support and to be a part of a community where these very special people have something very unique to offer. And it is about being unique.
Yeah. No, that's it, right? We all have gifts and talents, and we have gotten mostly past the point where we assume because someone has a particular type of disability or diagnosis up front that their strengths and talents are different and aren't going to react the same way. And we have seen that not only do the students with developmental disabilities grow up and expect to be included in workplace settings and housing settings and recreation settings, that people without disabilities grow up and expect to see those people in their coffee shops, in their apartment buildings, and all these kinds of things. We are growing a whole community and a whole society whose heads are already wrapped around inclusion, and it's absolutely brilliant.
I think that's one of the key policy. I mean, the ARC of Northern Virginia does so many things. I mean, you all do policy advocacy, you do direct services, you do coordination, you do awareness raising. Talk about a little bit about how you are continue to expand your services. It's been a year since we talked before. What have you added that's new? What are the new things that you're excited about?
Sure. So speaking of employment, when last we talked, we had been working a few years on a grant for a program that we called travel training, and we had written the grant to be kind of like a sit-down style curriculum, and you'd walk away with a binder, and we wanted to train a bunch of school transition workers and other folks who would counter people with disabilities on how to train people with disabilities on using the public transit system. Right? Your whole life opens up if you can get places on your own, and your ability to have jobs and work in different places. So we thought, like, this is really our ticket. And we had hired Kimberly Deloach, the former executive director of the Autism Society, to come on board, and she said, we have a whole new way to do this at our fingertips. Let's do it. And so she started working with a software partner now called Wonder to develop an app, a travel training app called TravelMate that allows people to film video footage of them getting on their exact bus, to have a cartoon that navigates their exact bus route. They can press a button and their phone can light up with, this is my name, and if I'm lost or confused, this is who you call. I mean, it's a phenomenal customizable tool for getting people to travel, and Kimberly took it even further and has now developed EmployMate, which is the same kind of thing for on the job settings. So someone can film themselves doing a job task and go back and look at that recording later. They can teach themselves how to do it, and they can program in ways to remember to ask your manager politely if you need help, or ways to navigate difficult situations at work without feeling like they have to remember it all and do it all perfectly the first time. So very fun stuff.
That is amazing.
It's really cool.
Amazing. So this is where innovation and technology meets real world problems.
Yeah, and it's a whole different world now that iPads and iPhones and similar smart devices are common usage. When a person with a disability pulls that out, they look as cool and hip as everybody else. You're no longer carrying around your 2-ton Dynavox, an old style communication device that set you apart from the crowd. It gets right back to inclusion and helping people navigate and understand the same world the rest of us are.
Okay, so it was developed, you got a grant for it. How do people take advantage of that? Is that just something that you get through the ARC of Northern Virginia? Is this something throughout the state? Is this something that's throughout the country? Tell us about it.
Yeah, it is throughout the country. So Kimberly's worked really hard on doing presentations, and you can adapt the software and customize it for any place that you live. So she does a lot of trainings with people on how to access the app, and anybody can go online and buy it. And it's user-friendly enough that you, a person with a disability, and your family and the people who love you could work this around yourself and customize you with it, or you could work at someone who's had some training in the software and can help you design it for yourself. So we've done a lot of free trainings for school social workers and school transition workers and other people who serve people with developmental disabilities, so that as they come in contact with folks who are experiencing barriers for transportation and employment, they can help them use it, but anybody can pick up their phone and buy it right now.
That is fantastic.
It's
It's an app-based world. I think things more and more, we're going to do everything from our phone. I really believe that. That with all the other devices, until they implant a microchip in our brain, in any case, we won't have to even hold anything, I guess.
Just
But
think it.
Really, we'll think it, it'll just like wink and something will happen, like Google Glass, like blink twice or shake your head or whatever that was. So this is very exciting. And what do you have in the pipeline that you're excited about?
Another thing that we've just kind of started bringing online in a really meaningful way is for a lot of years we've had folks say to us, what happens when I'm not here anymore to support my child with a disability? Who's going to be there? Or I'm here now and I'm burnt out. Or my 20-something child is tired of listening to their mom tell them how to do all these kinds of things. Who helps fill in all these gaps? Who does our kind of case management, life planning, long-term supports, drop-in, advocacy, those kinds of things? So our Special Needs Trust Department hired someone absolutely fantastic with a tremendous history in the disability rights and civil advocacy community named Megan, and she's working as our beneficiary advocate. So she's this kind of privately hired jack of all trades, and she works with folks who need help finding affordable housing. She'll go work with them, fill out housing applications, help them walk through a plan, help them walk through budgeting, help them pay their bills. If someone needs kind of drop-in supports. Family lives out of the area and they need someone to drop in every once in a while to make sure things look and smell right, some kind of independent eyes and ears. She can do that. If someone's homeless, working through a crisis, I mean, she does absolutely amazing things for people in a service that we or anybody else has never really been able to offer to families before. And I think it's tremendous peace of mind for families to know, when I can't do this anymore, I can say that someone at the ARC is going to do it, because even if that staff person changes over time, the ARC is going to be there, and that I trust.
Right, so that's fantastic. So you've got Wonder Woman on your staff, which is always good. But
We
even
have
if
a lot of Wonder Women.
So if she takes off her cape, the point is you are committed to providing the service.
Absolutely.
So you'll bring in another Wonder Woman or a Wonder Man or however that works. But that is very exciting in that we do have aging parents. I know that it's a constant concern for people thinking about what the future will bring. And the recent legislation in Virginia, and I believe that our state was the first state to have legislation around the ABLE legislation passed at the federal level. And so how has that changed the planning and what parents are thinking about and how you're trying to guide them down that path?
It's been really exciting because it got people talking about it. I mean, a few years ago, I think statistics were that 20% of parents had even heard of a special needs trust or a vehicle for saving for their child with a disability that meant that child wouldn't necessarily lose their affordable housing and all the other things that they needed to support them. And the attention that the ABLE Act got and the great press coverage and things like that have skyrocketed that interest in people's desire to plan for the future, and it's taken a lot of the fear out of it. People now feel like they're great tools, and so our Special Needs Trust team is working down in problem solving with families and saying, not only are there saving vehicles, you can work with Megan for life solving, and did you know Lucy can talk to you about waivers, and Kimberly can talk to you about travel training. There's a whole world out there, and it's kind of brought people into the fold and taken the fear element out of, am I allowed to die as a parent?
Yeah, and I mean, that's it weighs on people's minds. It would for, if you're a parent, it weighs on your mind, period.
Yeah.
But you figure, I mean, I've got 3, and you figure, well, they'll muddle through. But for parents of special needs kids, there are all these tools emerging, acknowledging that independence is important to these parents, self-sufficiency, the fact that they are safe and well cared for into their children's own adult lives. And I think the life expectancy, I have not seen any research on whether we are looking at longer life expectancies for people in the disability community.
Much, much longer. I mean, the fact that people with developmental disabilities now have access to health care, which for many generations they did not, and are included in schools and given safe and affordable places to live. I mean, it's the same supports that anyone would need to have a long and happy and healthy life. We've got more and more wonderful doctors and specialists in our community who really understand people with developmental disabilities and realize that there's tremendous quality of life and are more committed to making sure that people live longer, happier, healthier lives, whereas before there were unfortunately a lot of prejudgments about the life of a person with a developmental disability, and some medical professionals didn't work as hard as they did with some other folks.
So I'm going to throw you a curveball, just out of left field, but I've been seeing stories lately about marriages, right? Which years ago, you would not have ever heard of two people in the disability community not just living independently, but deciding to get legally married and live as a couple.
Yeah.
Is this a trend?
I think so. This is all part of our inclusion generation and expecting and demanding the same kind of things that our typically developing peers are. And I have to say, relationship navigation is tough for anybody of inability. And over the last few years at state conventions and forums online and things like that, we've started to see forums where, rather than ignoring it, we are talking about the fact that people with developmental disabilities want relationships and sex and relationship advice, and the attendance at things is through the roof, right? People want to know about these things. People are forming long-term relationships and then working together to make plans to live together. We have a rock star couple in the state of Virginia in the Hanover area, Chris and Jamie, who got married about 2 years ago after a really long courtship. And it's fun talking with Chris's family and his mom, who says, I used to worry about him so much, but now Jamie does the cooking and I know he's going to eat well. And it's like the same things we all get from marriage, right? You marry someone who has skills you don't.
Yeah, and just the
And you help each other.
companionship too.
Yeah.
I mean, you people are gregarious animals. We are built to form relationships. It's hardwired into us to want to form lasting relationships, and that certainly is partnership, romantic relationships, just like you have a relationship with your children or your parents or your cousins or whatever. And so I think it is important that we address that, and along with recognizing all of these other barriers that have been broken, that's one that we need to applaud, support, welcome, and believe is a healthy turn of events.
That's a life like yours, right?
Yes, a life like yours. That sounds like a hashtag. It's like hashtag a life like yours. That is something that I want everyone to remember too as we wrap up our show, and thank you, Lucy, so much for being here, is that the ARC of Northern Virginia is doing a lot of things. They are at the forefront of meeting the needs of those in our disability community, and go online, find them at the ARC of Northern Virginia,
thearcofnova.org.
arcofnova.org, to find out what they're doing and see how you can support them. I'm personally going to the Toastmasters thing myself, and I hope all of you will drop in and join us. So thank you very much, Lucy. Check out what's going on at the ARC of Northern Virginia and figure out how you can support the people you know in your community that are also part of the disability community. Thanks for watching Your Need to Know. We'll see you next time.